How's it going, everybody? So, I figured since the Spider Man countdown has ended, I figured that would be a pretty good time to go ahead and give you my ranking of the Spider Man films. Um, so, I am primarily going to be just doing everything that I reviewed leading up to No Way Home. So, even though I have seen the Venom movies and reviewed one of them, I figured for this case, I'll leave them out. Basically, all you really need to know is that they really wouldn't be anywhere high. Like, I love the first one. The second one, I found I had a little bit of issue with. More so on a rewatch. So they would. Venom 2 probably a little lower down. The first Venom would probably be somewhere in the middle, maybe a little higher up. But, anyways, yeah, so in this ranking, it's going to be the three Tobey Maguire movies, the two Andrew Garfield films, all three Tom Holland films, and Into the Spider-Verse. So, yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. So, coming in at number 9 is definitely going to have to be Spider-Man 3. It's. This film just didn't work for me. I'm sure there are a decent amount of people that really like this film, and more power to you, but it just didn't work for me. It's all the issues I started having with this trilogy really was culminated in this film, and the fact that Mary Jane is irritating beyond everything. She is the worst, my least favorite part of this entire trilogy, and she's at her worst in this film. And even then, a lot of the writing was just like, why you brought back the Uncle Ben thing for no reason? You handled Venom so poorly. Like there were some good things in this film. Like Tobey Maguire is once again great as always. The Sandman story was great, but everything else about this film, it just again on rewatch, this film was such a chore to get through, and it just didn't work for me. It's by far my least favorite Spider-Man film. So coming in at number 8. So Spider-Man 3 was really the only Spider-Man movie that I really didn't like, even though even though a lot of these ones lower down are lower, I still like them. But I'm gonna have to go on number 8. It might have to actually be Far From Home. Again, it's not a bad film by any means, but this is the film I by like not really nitpicks, but I guess issues with Tom Holland's character start coming in where he really doesn't feel the most responsible in this film. He felt more responsible in Homecoming. Because he was almost wanting to do the right thing in that film. Whereas here, it's just I don't know. Like again, it's still this is still a really good film. It's would be right under my top 10 maybe in terms of MCU films. But this, I don't know. It just that one thing about him really kind of holds this down for me. And it's just some comedic moments I really didn't feel like landed for me. But I mean, Tom Holland's once again great. Mysterio's fantastic. There's still a lot of good things about this film. It's just of a lot of these, it's probably gonna have to be around like lower down because. Eh. Okay. Coming at number 7. I don't know if I'm gonna get some hate for this or not, but my number 7 has got to be Spider-Man 2. Do not get me wrong. Do not get me wrong. This film is amazing. Once again, like everything from Far From Home upwards, I think are all really good films. But this is much more of my personal ranking. Like just in terms of just more subjective. Because if I were doing like if this were being more objective, this would be top 3 without a doubt. Because this is a great movie. But there are just some issues that I personally had with it that just really hold it down for me. Because, like, I wasn't sure how I felt about Peter losing his powers because of the reason that it was. I liked that whole thing about it. Like, I loved how it was all about every single wrong thing is happening to him at once, pretty much. So I like that aspect about it, but not only was the power losing I thought was weird. I would prefer if he just gave up being Spider-Man instead of just, I don't know. It was just such a weird thing for me, and I wasn't sure how I felt about it. And also, this is really where I started to hate Mary Jane, because it's like she knew who Peter was, but yet still treated him like crap through this film. It's mostly her character that really brings this down for me. Honestly, you fix her, this would be way higher up. But this film, it's just, those two things really kind of bring it down in terms of me being able to really personally enjoy this film. So I'm just gonna deal with it, but it's my opinion. If you think this is like number one, fantastic, because I can completely understand that. But for me, it's down there. So coming at number 6, this is once again not going to be a list you can find anywhere else, because number 6 is going to have to be The Amazing Spider-Man 2 for me. I know, I have The Amazing Spider-Man 2 of Spider-Man 2, but when I want to rewatch one of the sequels, I lean much more towards this film, because while, yes, this film has an exuberant amount of problems, there was really nothing in this film. There was stuff in this film I didn't like, but there was nothing in this film that I straight up hated. The closest thing I do have to something like that is probably just Green Goblin. But that's really about it, but he's not in there that much. Whereas in Spider-Man 2, I hated Mary Jane, and she's in so much of that film. But, I mean, I'm an Amazing Spider-Man advocate, so I mean, it shouldn't be surprising that this one is a little higher up, but I enjoyed this film. I think Andrew gives a much better performance here than he did in the first film. And I like all the characters. I mean, yeah, Electro is still kind of but I'm like, I didn't mind Harry, I love Gwen, I love Peter. There's so much I like about this film. And it's higher than Spider-Man 2 for me. If I want to rewatch one of those two films, I gravitate towards Amazing Spider-Man 2, because at the end of the day, I find myself having more fun with Amazing Spider-Man 2 than Spider-Man 2. But again, that's just me. So coming in at number 5 is going to have to be the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. These top 5 are, mostly these next 3, I will say, was when it started getting really hard to rank, because I think everything number 5 and up is like top tier films, just in general. But Tobey Maguire's first film, I think is one of the best origin stories we have ever seen. It pretty much takes the origin from the comics and just rips it out of the comics and puts it in a film. So much of this film just really worked. This was the one film I liked Mary Jane in. Green Goblin was phenomenal. Probably my favorite of the trilogy, even though Doc Ock from Spider-Man 2 was also fantastic. But it was a great introduction to Tobey Maguire and just this entire world in general. And this is one of the biggest Marvel films, because it was one of the first big Marvel films. Between this and, I'll say, X-Men. But there's just not a lot that I really didn't like about this film. But I mean, it really just depends on which one I prefer, because the next 2, it really starts getting tricky on where I would rank all these films. But no, between all of these, I think this would have to be number 5 for me. But it's still a fantastic film. So coming at number 4, even though it was tough ranking the first Tobey Maguire, ranking number 4 and number 3 is really where it started getting tricky. Because I really like these films pretty much on the same level. Number 4 is going to have to be Spider-Man Homecoming. For me, this was a great introduction into this trilogy for Tom Holland as Spider-Man. Yeah, he was introduced in Civil War, but this film was just so good. I only had really nitpicks about this film. There was one thing I really didn't like, but that was just some characters, or really one character with Flash. But I don't know, there was just a lot about this film that I just really enjoyed. It's like, The villain was great. It made, to me, I didn't mind the whole thing of like him being Iron Man Jr. I know it's what people call him, but it's just like when you're in the world of the MCU, this is kind of how you'd expect a teenager to react, and that's how Spider-Man has reacted in the comics before. Considering the fact that the Ultimate Comics are a big inspiration, for this movie, and that's pretty much how he acted in those comics, it makes sense. But yeah, just I love the villain, love Tom Holland as Spider-Man. Just wasn't a lot that I didn't like about this film, aside from a couple of nitpicks here and there, and just a couple of problems, but it was still overall good. Number 3 is going to have to be The Amazing Spider-Man. I have gushed about this film time and time again, especially from the review, because I genuinely think is a great, amazing film. And that might be a little bit my bias talking, because it's because of this film that I got so hooked on Spider-Man as a character. But really, the only thing I didn't like about this film was just the fact that, the Peter skateboarding thing. That's really it. That's really the biggest thing that holds him back from being a 10 out of 10 film, because that's really something I didn't like. But it's also barely in the film, which makes sense. But because it's barely there, it's just, I love everything else. I love Andrew Garfield in this role. I love that we have a competent love interest, finally. I think the villain was great. A lot of the action scenes are great. That final scene with the crane scene is still one of my favorite scenes in just cinema history. It's just, so much of this film just worked for me. And I know it's a bit of a hot take again. I'm an Amazing Spider-Man advocate, but what can you do? So coming in at number 2 is going to have to be Into the Spider-Verse. Once again, I've gushed about this film time and time again. In my review, I said it was my favorite movie of all time. There's really only a couple of nitpicks in it. Some Spider-Man and a couple of villains don't get a lot, but that was stuff that I really didn't mind, really, because again, all the characters get time to shine, so I can excuse some of that, like some issues like that, if the characters are memorable, which we'll get into once we get to number 1. But it's like, it was because so many people were skeptical about this film, even me, because when I first saw it, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna like this. Then I started seeing more of it, and I was like, oh, this actually looks pretty good. I kind of want to go see it. Then I saw it, and I'm just like, oh, that's one of the best. At that point, I was like, oh, this is the best movie I've seen in my entire life. But they handle a lot of these characters so well, from Gwen to both versions of Peter to Miles. I've gushed about this film so much, and it was my number 1. But my number 1, and it should be pretty obvious, just considering the fact that I just uploaded my review of it. Number 1 is Spider-Man No Way Home. Yes, I know it's so recent, but at the same time, it's just, again, it lived up to the hype. It solved all my nitpicks that I personally had with Tom Holland Spider-Man. It brings in so many other past villains, and in some cases makes them even better than they already were. In the cases of Green Goblin, who was already fantastic, they somehow made him better here. And even in cases like Electro, because again, my nitpick is the fact that it doesn't make the most sense as to why he's there, but because the rest of his character is so fantastic and so memorable, I'm able to give that a pass. But it's because he was sort of alright in Amazing Spider-Man 2, but here it's just like, oh, now you really are amazing. There was so much about this film that I just like. Even after rewatching the film, after doing my review, I wouldn't change a single thing I said in my review. It is my favorite movie of all time, as of now. Who knows what Across the Spider-Verse will do, or whatever, or any of that stuff, but as of right now, this is my favorite Spider-Man film, my favorite Marvel film, and just my favorite film in general, because the amount of past references is just phenomenal, and I already want to see it again. I've seen it twice. I already want to see it again. I won't go too heavy into some spoilers because it's so recent. But if you do want to see what all I think of this film, go check out my review of it. I know it's a bit of a longer review, but there's just way too much to talk about with this film. So, yep, No Way Home is number one, and yep, that pretty much does it. So, I hope y'all enjoyed this ranking of all the Spider-Man films. Once I start reviewing more franchises, then I will start doing rankings for those as well. An MCU ranking, I'm gonna have to review a lot to get up to that point, but yeah, I'm here for that. So, the next, depending on when I do these Star Wars videos, because I know several people are wanting me to do that. Yeah, depending on when I do those, I'll do rankings for those films as well. That ranking will definitely be a lot easier because I pretty much already know my ranking. This one took a little bit, but it was mostly between all the first films, like Tobey's, Andrew's, and Tom's, all their first films, because those kind of interchanged for me. But yeah, I hope y'all enjoy. Be sure to check out all my other reviews to see my more in-depth thoughts about pretty much all these movies. And yeah, that'll pretty much do it. So thank you all for watching. See y'all later, webheads.